bang your head. Oh, I guess we're recording. I'm sorry. Welcome back. It's Mr. Lewis, another one of your fun videos for Chapter 3. This is 3.4, Adaptation and Survival. Here is your bell ringer on the board, ladies and gentlemen. Well, on your screen, not on the board. You know, I'm just used to teaching in the classroom, so this is on your board here. So this is your bell ringer. Go ahead and answer it on edmodo.com. Alrighty. Leave it there for a second. You got it? You got it? You got it? Alright, here we go. Maybe. Let's go. Let's go. There we go. All right, there we go. Here's our objectives for today. Today we're going to identify 3 kinds of adaptations that help organisms survive. We're going to describe 4 parts of natural selection. We're going to explain how variation, look at that, explain. We're going to explain how variation occurs within a population. We're going to explain why genetic variation within a population is important. And we're going to explain how resistance to insecticide is a survival characteristic. All right, here we go. Adaptations for obtaining food. Ladies and gentlemen, we all have to find a way to obtain food. So for us as humans, we got these little opposable thumbs. Those things there help us to grasp and hold on to our food and stuff. We have inside, our teeth are designed so we can rip and shred meat apart as we go ahead and eat. But other organisms have adaptations so they can obtain food as well. If you look down on page 84 at that picture on page 84, you have that woodpecker there. He has an extremely hard skull so that he can pound into those trees and hammer those holes and get those insects and stuff for him to eat. All right, almost all organisms have adaptations of some form so they can obtain some type of food. Now, there are things called predator-prey adaptations, and if you remember from the last video, we talked about predator-prey. Predator-prey, simply a predator is something that eats an animal. A prey is the animal that's getting eaten. Which is better? I think the predator. Now, when we talk about predator-prey adaptations, and I'm sure you could think of many different kinds, those adaptations help that organism to survive in its environment against its predators. Okay, the most common one, which of course we here in the South love to use, is camouflage. Now there's animals that use camouflage, and we use camouflage as well when we go hunting for those animals, because it's rabbit hunting season. We go looking for those animals and stuff. We use camouflage to hide us, to make us blend into the woods. Well, animals use the same thing. Now granted, they can't change their skins unless they're a chameleon. They can't change their skin, but their skin color and their fur color, it is all designed by something. It is all designed so that they blend in the environment that they live in. It'd be kind of bad for a white-tailed deer to go running around in a snowy environment, because the brown fur of that white-tailed deer is going to make it stand out for miles in the snowy environment of the north and the Arctic. It's going to be standing out, so it'd be easy for us to kill. Camouflage is there to help protect those organisms so they can survive against the predators. All right. Now, there's adaptations also for interactions. What that means is that some organisms can actually create adaptations so that when they interact with each other, it makes it mutually beneficial. If you look on page 86, you see that picture of the Hawaiian honey creeper. It has a very, very long nose, or beak, I should say, so it can get down to the bottom of the lobelia flower. So it can reach down there into the bottom of the lobelia flower and get the nectar and stuff out of that flower. If it had a very short beak, it couldn't get down to the bottom of that lobelia flower and get that nectar from there. So this is an example of how some organisms are adapted because of the interactions they have with each other. Okay. Then we have natural selection. Now, this is evolution. Everything we're talking about here is evolution, so just in case you were wondering. This is the idea of natural selection. Now, natural selection says that it is a process by which individuals that are better adapted to their environment survive and reproduce more successfully than less well-adapted individuals do. What does that simply mean? And why couldn't they just say this? It means survival of the fittest. Basically, the organisms that are the fittest to survive in an environment are the organisms that's going to survive. Okay, those organisms that are best suited for that environment, those are the organisms that are going to survive. They're going to reproduce and continue passing on their genes. All right. Now, let's take a look at natural selection. When we talk about natural selection, there are 4 parts to natural selection. All right. Remember that this is a theory. I want you to pay attention to that. This is a theory. Okay. A natural selection. Now that explains how populations change based on what the environment is. Okay. What does that mean? That means that when we talk about Charles Darwin saw those finches and saw those finches that were on the Galapagos Islands and said, okay, well, those are the same kind of finches that are over here in Ecuador. However, there's a difference in them because their beaks are different. Well, those organisms, according to the theory of natural selection, those organisms that had the different beak was able to obtain food better in the Galapagos Islands, and because of that, they were able to survive and reproduce. Well, when they survived and they reproduced, they passed on those genes of the different beak size to their offspring. The ones that had the beak size from Ecuador couldn't get food, so those all died off. But the ones that did have the beak size for the Galapagos Islands, those were the ones who were able to survive and reproduce. That's what they mean by in response to changes in their environment. All right. I just talked about that, so we don't talk about that. So here are the 4 steps to natural selection. The first step in this train of natural selection is this idea: more offspring are born than will live to become adults. In other words, they're going to produce many babies. Okay, they're going to have a lot of babies out there, and the reason for that is to hope that a very, very few number of those will actually reach it down here to number 4. Majority of those would die off in this region right here in 2 and 3. Majority of those would die off there. But in order to get those couple that's going to survive, they have to produce a ton of them so that they can have that. The chances are better that several of them will survive. Genetic variation within populations is the second step. It says that individuals in a population are different from one another. Some of the different characteristics improve the chances that individuals survive and reproduce. Others lower these chances. For example, rabbits that are stronger or faster are more likely to survive and reproduce than weaker and slower rabbits. Kind of makes sense. If you have a weaker, slower rabbit, guess what? Those birds or those predators will go ahead and attack those weak and slower rabbits and eat them. So guess what? They don't get to survive and reproduce. So at that point, in the second step, which is genetic variation within the population, those organisms that are better suited to that environment are going to survive. The faster ones and the stronger ones are going to survive. Then you have the struggle to survive, which is the third step. It says an environment might not have enough food or water for every individual born, meaning individuals are killed by other organisms and others cannot find mates. Only some individuals survive and reproduce. Again, this is an example of you had the strong, okay, you had a whole bunch born, all right, and out of that whole bunch, let's just say there's 10, out of that whole bunch, you had several that died off because they were weak or slower, so there's only 5 left, okay. Well, then through the step 3, the struggle to survive, out of those 3, there's only a limited, or those 5, there's only a limited amount of food left. So maybe those top 2 decide, okay, I'm going to take all the food because we're hungry, and we can beat up on these ones, and guess what? There's only 2 left. All right, and then at the end, you have the successful reproduction. Successful reproduction is the key to natural selection. The individuals that have better adaptations for living in their environment and for finding mates are more likely to reproduce. Those who are not well adapted to their environment are more likely to die early or to have few offspring. So those last 2, well, you never know. One of those may end up dying, okay, and leave one last one there, and there you go. Or those both could reproduce, and then they would start the whole process all over again. So we're just looking for the best of the best is really what it's looking for, and that's the reason why they produce so many offspring, okay? Now, there are changes in genetic variation. Now, this gets into something that's called a genetic bottleneck, and we'll go ahead and pull up genetic bottleneck right here and talk about this. All right. In order for animals, because we reproduce sexually, in order for animals to survive and for their species to survive, it is essential that we have genetic variation. In other words, it's essential that we have many different genes of those animals. Okay, that you don't want to have just gene A and gene B and that's it for all those animals, because if something happens to gene A or something happens to gene B, guess what? that population of animals is going to go. Okay, so you don't want to have that you need to have that genetic variation. Now, on this next slide, okay, you guys could read of all this right here. On this next slide, I want to talk about genetic bottleneck. What that basically means is this. So all these organisms have all these many different genes, okay? And so they're all floating around willy-nilly. All these different genes are out here. This is the whole population. Well, then something happens. Who knows what that is, but some kind of natural environmental issue, or maybe it's a predatory issue or something where humans are attacking. All those organisms all of a sudden start dying off, and the only ones that are left are the ones that have these two specific genes. Well, guess what? All these other genes, because these organisms were killed off, are gone from the genetic variation of that organism. And so next thing you have is just these genes here. These two genes right here become over here, and they split up with their offspring, and that's all the genes that there are. Now, that doesn't seem like a bad thing, but this is the reason why we don't marry first cousins, okay? Because you share some of the very close genes of your family, and birth defects happen. And they discovered, as they were doing this, they discovered, like the Florida Panthers, those panthers had problems with heart problems and reproductive problems because of so much of that genetic variation had been killed off. All right. Now, the last thing we got to talk about here is insecticide resistance. Now, insecticide resistance is simply this: you spray bug spray, insect dies. Not all of them always die, and you guys have probably seen that. Not every single insect dies. Well, guess what? The one that doesn't die gets to go back and reproduce. Well, guess what? When it reproduces organisms that are resistant to that bug spray. So when you spray that bug spray again, guess what? None of them die. And that is because that insect that survived passed on the insecticide resistance to its offspring, and its offspring were then able to pass on that insecticide resistance to their offspring. For this reason, it's best that you always change your insecticides, and that's the reason why farmers do that. They don't always use the exact same insecticide, because if they did, guess what? Those insects would be resistant to it, and those insects then would be able to destroy their crop. So they have to continually change their insecticide use. Oh my gosh, Becky, look at this here. This is our review time. It's time for the review. This is your 3.4 section review right here. I'll go ahead and be quiet, let you go ahead and read, take notes if you want to, and we'll go from there. So here we go. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that little brief moment there. So you guys go ahead and read your 3.4 review if you took some notes. Got this stuff down to help you study for your test. Other than that, I don't have anything else for you. I hope you guys